big news yesterday. We're starting to get a picture of what the impeachment trial will look like in the Senate. We heard who the impeachment managers will be, a lot of familiar faces there, and we're getting a sense of what the ground rules will be. What did we learn that's important, and what do you think are the things we have not learned yet that you would like to find out as soon as possible?
Well, I don't think we learned anything new. We know that the Democrats, in their haste to draw up articles of impeachment because they couldn't find a crime that the president committed, which everyone knew he had not, they simply pounded together two articles of impeachment, one on abuse of power, quote unquote, and one on obstructing Congress. Neither of those two so-called charges exist as a crime under the clause of impeachment in the Constitution, which requires impeachment for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. So right at the beginning, the House is off on the wrong foot because they wanted to embarrass the president. They wanted to interfere with the functions of government, such as the treaties that the president is engaged in signing, the trade agreements that the president is engaged in working out. I actually learned nothing yesterday except the names of one or two of the rather relatively unknown members of the House managers that Nancy Pelosi named. I did notice that Nancy Pelosi still is having trouble articulating words and speaking, some motor function problems. That was something that was also not news to me. I did see that she's capable of wielding a number of pens simultaneously to sign articles of impeachment and the transmission material that goes with it. I expect the House to try and be inflammatory in all of its rhetoric to make the articles of impeachment sound more serious than they really are. This is a political game at this point, not a legal game. But the Senate will work its will. I expect this thing to go on for a couple of weeks, and I expect it to be over and the president to be acquitted.
There's a few things in there I want to unpack with you, and I think you hit on what people immediately became fixated with, including us at Breitbart, which is that Pelosi, who acted as though, or at least sometimes acts as though this is a grave moment, a serious moment, was signing whatever it is that she had to sign with a dozen pens, maybe 24 pens, maybe 36 pens. I don't know the exact number. Yes. But she's doing a celebratory thing like, it was Barack Obama signing his Obamacare plan, a signature achievement. She's treating it as though it's a celebratory occasion. So why can't they decide? Is this a grave moment? Is the country in deep duress? Or is this just another achievement for the political left?
Well, it's the latter, and it has nothing to do with the seriousness of governing. This is a contrived set of impeachment articles. It bears no resemblance to anything that the founders had in mind. In fact, what this impeachment is a carbon copy of is what the founders rejected, and that was malfeasance in office. They said that we cannot get involved in the type of disputes that would lead us to partisan disputes where you would have only one of the political parties in the Congress voting for the impeachment. And yet that is precisely what the Democrats have done. This is a partisan impeachment, and by that I mean only Democrats voted for it. All Republicans voted against it. Some Democrats voted against it. Another one was added yesterday who refused to go along. So what we're faced with is Pelosi. Really, this is a vanity exercise for her. You can see her preening as she performs her role as Speaker of the House, the smiling, trying to keep the false teeth in, doing everything she can to pretend like she's serious. And yet, as the moments go on, she cannot restrain herself, and she becomes practically silly and embarrassing in her joy. This is not a serious moment. The Democrats are trying to paint it that way. You can see Jerry Nadler as he kind of rolls his way up to the podium trying to get sentences out, and Adam Schiff, who's evil personified, being so serious that he's going to fall over or be brittle and collapse. It's a sort of a fascinating contrast between this fake seriousness Nadler and Schiff, and then this giddy, sort of vain pronouncements of Nancy Pelosi and the fake prayerfulness and invoking God and being outraged when she's saying that she hates the president and then claims she's a Roman Catholic and that she doesn't hate anybody, which of course is ludicrous. So anyway, that's where we are.
So what do you think of the fact that the people who are going to be leading this is who I refer to as the impeachment thruple of Pelosi, Schiff, and Nadler? None of them have convinced a single Republican to back the impeachment, and yet they're still the ones who are going to be managing, quote unquote. There's some others in the mix, but they're the ones who are going to be in charge, and they're going to be the ones who are going to get the headlines, and they're going to be the ones who are going to be they're going to have to make the case. And as you're noting, and as I've noted over and over again, they're wildly unconvincing that the president has done anything wrong. And so are they really the best they could do? They couldn't find someone or a couple of people who maybe could convince the public? It seems like it's a pretty sad effort.
Well, it's been a sad effort from the beginning because it's been a partisan political gesture. This is not a serious legal effort of impeachment, mainly because the president did nothing wrong. The phone call with Zelensky was perfectly proper. There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with a quid pro quo in foreign policy. We do it all the time. If you don't do this, you're not going to get this. We are threatening, for example, the Iraqis are threatening to throw our troops out of their country. We are saying, no, you're not, and here's the reason you're not, and if you do, you're going to lose all of this $250 million in defense spending money we gave you to bolster your internal troops. Now, is that illegal? The threat from the Pentagon? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. So the reason this doesn't have any legs is because the American people don't sense that anything wrong has occurred. Now, you look at these crazy polls where they say 60% of the people want witnesses and all this. These are dumb polls. They're stupid polls. They mean absolutely nothing because they're taken in a vacuum. And so where the Democrats are is they have these three people leading this effort with a bunch of non-entities tagging along for the hell of it. And the sole purpose of this is to dirty up the president for the 2020 election. They know he's not going to be removed from office, so they're trying to do everything they can to create instances where they can have fake news, false stories, and innuendo and smears and everything about the president so that they can try and defeat him. Of course, they're going to have to do that with a candidate. They don't have one yet, and the ones that they do have are woefully inadequate. But the president is standing strong, looking strong, holding up very well under all of this, and I think he's at the top of the mountain at this point. I don't see anything that they're going to bring forward that's going to topple the president or change any Republican minds. Now, you're always going to have people like Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski, who are these strange ducks who insist on doing things differently than everybody else. Romney, of course, is just an ass, and so people just have to ignore him. I mean, because he's as people have said about him, he's got such an inflated view of himself, and he's so pompous that he generally reflects the view of himself that nobody else in the world has. But I don't think any of the Republicans are going to vote for removal, even if they may vote for some tendentious procedural maneuver like calling an extra witness or two. So I think where we are is the Democrats, with the complicity of the mainstream media, which of course hates Trump and lies about him regularly. And so the media doing what it's doing, the Democrats would never have been able to do what they've done on impeachment without the support of a corrupt American media.
Yeah, and you're correct on this with Romney. And the key point here is that the left will try and the media will try to make it seem like if he does stray from the rest of the Republicans on this, that it's a big deal. But it's not a big deal because everyone who actually cares about conservative and Republican politics knows that he's just sort of an odd duck doing his own thing, and his opinion is merely Mitt Romney's opinion. It has nothing to do with he's no backing from the public, so it doesn't represent anything that's a significant threat to the president. He's a caucus of one. Yes, brilliant. Okay, Joe diGenova is with me. diGenova and Tensing LLP. You guys know him from his cable news appearances, I think, pretty well, and very, very wise person on legal issues. Let's talk about your hopes for the rules, or what we know about the rules, or do you want to see witnesses called? Are you hoping this is just dismissed as quickly as humanly possible? Because I'll tell you, Joe, I would like to hear from the whistleblower. I would like to hear from Eric Ciamarella, if that is a different person from the whistleblower, which of course no one actually believes is a different person, but just in case. I would like to hear from Pencil Neck. I would like to hear from Hunter Biden. I would like to hear from Joe Biden. I thought Majority Leader McCarthy had a good point. Joe Biden should stop campaigning while this is going on. I think it's unfair to him because the rest of the people he's campaigning against are in the Senate. They're supposed to be dealing with his grave impeachment. I want to see some of this stuff play out because the Democrats shouldn't be able to have their cake and eat it too, in my opinion. But it seems like the general wisdom on the right is that they just want this thing to be over with quick and we all move on.
Well, I think I certainly understand your position, and there's part of me that wants to do that. But from a practical political standpoint and governing the country, which the president is trying to do and is doing magnificently, the sooner this is over, the better. There is a way to get the testimony of Eric Ciaramella, the fake whistleblower, and the testimony of Michael Atkinson, the Inspector General of the intelligence community, who falsely put forward Eric Ciaramella's complaint with no basis for doing so. There's a major scandal here about the Inspector General of the intelligence community, Michael Atkinson. This guy is part of the coup. He's not some lowly nobody. This guy is directly related to Mary McCord, who was the Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division and other positions in the Obama administration, who's at the center of this and now works for the Brookings Institution at that left-wing legal group called Lawfare, the blog group that they have at Brookings. I actually want to see oversight hearings conducted by the Senate Judiciary Committee. There will be none by the Intelligence Committee because that's actually Senator Richard Burr from North Carolina is completely controlled by Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia. It's an open joke in the administration and by anybody who watches Capitol Hill that Mark Warner is actually the chairman, someone who was intimately involved in gathering evidence against the President of the United States privately with private individuals. So I think the way to deal with the witnesses we all want to hear from is to do it in oversight hearings. I think that the House's case will be full of sound and fury, signifying nothing after they do their presentation for a few days. The Republicans will have a chance to respond, and then there's going to be a vote on whether or not they want to proceed or have an acquittal vote at that point. The best result would be no witnesses and an acquittal after the presentations. Whether or not the majority leader has the votes to do that, I don't know, given the three strange Republicans we just talked about.
Joe, is it true that you've been traveling internationally to kind of investigate some of this stuff and to investigate some of the general corruption that you think is happening?
Well, actually, our law firm, specifically my wife, Victoria Tunsing, was asked by Rudy Giuliani to represent some Ukrainian public officials and private individuals who had information about attempts to frame Donald Trump and Paul Manafort. Those efforts were underway to go interview those people overseas in Ukraine, but because of the resistance of the American embassy, the American embassy threatened the Ukrainian government not to grant visas to Rudy and my wife Victoria, and of course the trip never happened. There was no trip. There were no interviews conducted over there. There were one of two television interviews that were conducted here in the United States, some by John Solomon, the great reporter, independent reporter who has done the single best reporting on this entire scandal. But there was no travel overseas. We have traveled overseas to Vienna on a number of occasions to meet with our client, who is a gentleman by the name of Dmitry Firtash, who is fighting extradition to the United States, and we are helping in that effort to fight extradition. But we did nothing in Ukraine. Victoria was asked to do so, but unfortunately Madam Yovanovitch, the American ambassador, prevented those trips from occurring.
Interesting. Last question to Joe, and thanks again for joining me, Joe diGenova.
Sure, my
diGenova
pleasure.
and Tunsing LLP. The left will be very hot this morning on an interview last night with Lev Parnas, who's a Rudy Giuliani associate with Rachel Maddow, and he's trying to implicate the president, the vice president, and the attorney general, and saying all of them knew a lot and were on. It was more of a widespread pressure campaign than people let on. And does this matter? I have to admit, I'm not sure it does. But what do you think this means beyond just another day of talking points from the media?
Well, I'm not quite sure why Mr. Parnas is doing this. We met Mr. Parnas. We worked with him. He was actually an interpreter for our law firm. He interpreted documents, translated conversations with people, including our own client. He's a very interesting man, very smart, very bright. He had wide-ranging knowledge of Russian and Ukrainian politics and political figures. I found him to be very interesting, entertaining, and helpful. We, of course, all of us knew nothing about these criminal allegations, which occurred long before any of us met him, which involved these allegations of illegal campaign contributions. And what he's doing now is apparently the bidding of his lawyer to go on television and do things like this. I think it's a rather foolish legal strategy, which I think will not help him. Throwing out wild allegations against people, which are struck down almost immediately by all the major participants, is not, in my idea, a great legal strategy. But, you know, sometimes people do things that are just weird. You just don't know why things happen. And if a lawyer wants publicity, like apparently Mr. Parnas' lawyer does, he appeared with him on television last night, but was asked no questions, understandably. When a lawyer wants that type of publicity, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, he's obviously a lawyer in search of notoriety, and that never really helps a client. And I feel sorry for Mr. Parnas, who I actually liked and worked with. I thought he was a very, very interesting and helpful man, and I feel sorry for him and his family.
Interesting. Great perspective, Joe. Really appreciate the time again, and come back soon.
Sure, anytime. Delighted to do it.